there and welcome to the Stitch Sessions. My name is Karen and I love sharing my joy and enthusiasm of crochet. And what I want to show you today is how to do a slip stitch for absolute beginners. So I've got this series for absolute beginner crocheters, or if you're thinking about starting the craft of crochet, this tutorial is for you. So let's get started. Now, anytime you work on a crochet project, you're going to need four main things. You're going to need your yarn, your hook, a pair of scissors, and a yarn needle. And I always emphasize that a yarn needle is different than a thread needle. It's much larger and has a larger eye. Okay. Now, if you're a beginner, I always recommend starting with a medium 4-weight yarn. Yarn comes in different weights. Some yarns are thicker and some yarns are thinner. So I find that a medium 4 is a nice middle of the road yarn, especially for beginners. And the hook size you'll see me use a lot in this beginner crocheter series is a 6mm hook, which is also known as a J or a size 10. I like this hook for beginners because it's not too bulky and it's not too thin either. So just the right size for beginners. Now, let's get started. Today we are talking about how to do a slip stitch. Now, sometimes people will think that this is one of the very first stitches you learn, if it's not the first stitch. And technically, when we learn to do the chain stitch, which by the way, if you haven't seen that tutorial yet, you really should, and I'll leave a link for it in the description box down below. Technically, a chain stitch is a slip stitch, but when we work a slip stitch onto a piece of work that's already in progress, it feels a little bit different. So let's talk about it here. So I've got my swatch here where I created a few rows of single crochet stitches, okay? And if you are still wondering how to do a single crochet stitch, well, then you gotta watch that video. And of course, that will be linked in the description box down below. But let's assume you've already done a few rows here. I've done a chain 1, and now I'm gonna turn my work, okay? So this tutorial is just designed to show you how the mechanics of the slip stitch work. So I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to insert it into the very first stitch, and see how that hook just loops under? Or you can say that you are yarning over, so the working yarn goes over, and I'm just going to pull that loop through. Now, if we were doing a single crochet, we would leave it on our hook, but in the case of a slip stitch, we pull it through the stitch, but then we continue to pull it through the loop on our hook. And so now this loop becomes the new loop on our hook. And you might be able to see it's almost flush to our piece of fabric here. And it's designed exactly to do that. So our slip stitch is the most shallow stitch you will ever work. And then of course, next up is the single crochet, which is a little bit taller, which is this stitch here, and then we have stitches that get taller and taller. Now, let's do that again to make sure that makes sense. So we're going to go into the next stitch, and I'm going to insert my hook, and I always make sure that the tops of those V's are showing right there. And then I'm going to yarn over so I can hook that working yarn. I'm going to pull it through the stitch, and I'm going to pull it through the loop on my hook. Now, it's really important that we don't pull too tightly. Because it's such a shallow stitch, you want to make sure that you have the ability to work into that. And sometimes there are projects where you're doing a lot of rows of slip stitches. Boy, oh boy, that is a really tight stitch to work into. So if you're pulling tightly, it's going to be very difficult to get your hook in there. So I'm going to do that again, insert my hook. I'm going to pull that yarn through. See how I'm keeping it relaxed? And then I'm going to pull it through again, just like that. So let's do it again. I'm going to insert my hook, pull the loop through the stitch. Now, sometimes what will happen is if people are pulling tightly, see, they'll pull through the stitch, they'll keep it here, and then they just kind of force it through there, right? And so what happens is your work is going to start to bunch right here. And that's why instead of a nice kind of even sides, you're going to get a work that looks a little wonky. That's kind of normal for beginner crocheters. You're just getting used to kind of the tension and the tone in your hands. So don't get too frustrated with yourselves. Just remind yourself, okay, I'm holding a little tightly. So just undo it, start again, and really work on keeping your hands a little bit relaxed. You don't want them to be too loosey-goosey, but you don't want them to be tight, okay? So you always just insert into the stitch, pull through the stitch, and pull through the loop, okay? Again, insert through the stitch, pull a loop, and then pull it through. Notice what I'm doing with my non-dominant hand. I'm actually holding the fabric, which helps me control the tone of the slip stitches. So you can see that they're sitting fairly evenly. Sometimes what happens is with newer crocheters, we're so busy looking at what's happening here that we don't realize that the non-dominant hand is doing a lot of work. So not only is it holding the yarn, but it's also holding the work in its place. If we were busy just holding the yarn and here, right? See how wonky that, see, I can't even do it without holding. It's very wonky, so you can't not hold on to it. So it's very important that you have the working project in your hand and your dominant hand is the one working the hook. So for me, I'm right-handed, so I am inserting through there and pulling up through there and then pull up a loop, okay? So I'm going to continue to do slip stitches all the way to the end of this row. And then I'm just going to come back and show you how you would turn your work if you were doing a few rows of slip stitches. So see, once you get the hang of it, it gets really easy. So I'm almost at the end. So I've got 2 stitches left. See the V's there? So I have 1. And then I have 2, so that's the end. So these, I've been working into single crochet stitches, so they've been a little easier to work into, okay? And pull through, okay? So when I turn my work, you can see that there's kind of a double edge here. Because the slip stitch is so shallow, it's really, so that's where it is there, okay? So this is the side with the single crochet. So this is where it can get a little confusing. So now when we turn our work, first we always chain 1, and again, that doesn't count as anything. We turn our work, and what's really important here is you're gonna see 2 sets of V's. Oh boy, this could be very confusing. So you have a set that's right here, which is the one that's closest to you. And then you have this set here. See, that's a separate set. That's actually kind of facing away from you. That's the slip stitch we just worked into, or that's the slip stitch we just created. So here is where it's important not to be too tight. So when we now do another row of slip stitches, we want to make sure we're not working into these V's here. We just want to tilt our work a little bit this way so that we can see the tops of the V's. Because it's such a shallow stitch, this is all we have to go on. So now that chain 1, remember that the loop on the hook never counts as anything. Then we have that chain 1. In this case, it's not going to count as anything either. This is our first stitch. So in order to slip stitch again, we actually go into the V because that's the only place we have to go. So you insert your hook into the V. Now notice, see that? I only have 1 loop. That is normal for a slip stitch. All other stitches, like the single crochet stitch, if I were to insert into the single crochet stitch, see, whoops, I would have 2 loops there, okay? But we're going to slip stitch into a slip stitch. So again, I go into that V, and I'm basically picking up the back loop there. I pull up a loop through and then through the loop that was on my hook. And now I have a new loop on my hook. So if I do that again, I go to the next stitch, I insert into that stitch, I hook the yarn, pull it through, and pull it through. See, and I try to make sure it's a little bit relaxed, okay? So again, insert, yarn over so that you can hook that yarn, pull it through. See how it's not too tight, and pull it through. Let's do it one more time. So I go into that stitch, and then I hook the yarn, pull it through the stitch, and pull it through the yarn. So there you have 2 rows of slip stitches. Now, whoops, I just pulled that loop out. So this stitch is really handy as you get more comfortable. A lot of times for the brims of hats or the edging of blankets or scarves, we might use these slip stitch rows to create some interesting texture in our work. So it's not like you're not going to see this stitch often. You definitely will. What I would always recommend is get really comfortable with your single crochets, of course. And then the slip stitches are really great practice for working on your tone and your tension not to be too tight. So guys, my recommendation is to do rows and rows and rows and rows of slip stitches so that you practice and get really nice and comfortable. So the whole thing with the craft of crochet, and back in the old days, what got me super excited is once I can see something starting to form and work up, like that got me really excited. So this is why I'm kind of creating and recreating, for those of you that have been on my channel for a while, some of my basics so that it's nice and clear, it's a bit more updated, and I want you to feel like it's exciting because it really is. And in order to get excited, you want to feel like it's doable, it's easy, it's clear. And hopefully this tutorial has been nice and clear. So if you find it really helpful, please do share it with a friend that you think might like it. If you have another friend as well that may be curious about crochet and wanting to get started. And of course, I would recommend that they watch the slip knot, the chain stitch, and the single crochet tutorials first. Those will be linked down below, as I've mentioned. And if you like this tutorial, please do give me a thumbs up. It'll help me know that I'm on the right track with this beginner series. And if you're new here, I invite you to come hang out with me every Wednesday morning when I upload a brand new tutorial with a new crochet project. So make sure to press that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you'll get notified every time I upload a brand new video. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and happy crocheting, of course. Have an amazing day. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next session. Bye-bye.